Hi, and welcome to the Environment and Policy Assessment and Observation, or the EPAO training. This training is broken into a couple different sections. This one is part one. We'll do some introductions to the EPAO and to childcare itself as a setting. First, a little bit of an introduction. I'm your facilitator. I'm Steph Mazuka. I have been working with the Children's Healthy Weight Research Group since 2008, and the EPAO and measurement of childcare settings has been a large part of my experience with that. I have done lots of trainings around the country and even some international locations, and I'm always available to answer any EPAO questions that anyone might have. So like I said, this video series is broken into 4 different parts, and that's just to make them a little bit more manageable for folks who are using them. First, we'll start with the introduction to both the observation itself and to the setting of childcare environments. Then parts 2 and 3 go through the bones of the observation and document review. So individual question by question and the nitty-gritties there. And last, part 4 wraps up with some just basics on data collection protocols, as well as the other EPAO resources that we have available to folks. So first, what is the EPAO? It's the Environment and Policy Assessment and Observation, and as such, it measures the environments and policies within childcare environments. And this is done in a manner to be objective and effective. And so what we want to do, if you think about this throughout the entire training and your use of the EPAO, we're always measuring the environment. So not necessarily what each individual child is doing at any given point in time, but what is the sum total of the environment and what is a typical child experiencing within that early care and education program. And we think about this both from a social and physical environment, so those teacher-child interactions as well as the spaces and time that's provided for different activities throughout the day. The EPAO was developed to be an objective assessment, and it was created during the project that's called knapsack, but it's not necessarily linked to that specific planning model. So it was the impetus for creating this objective assessment, but the two are not necessarily linked all the time, always. Knapsack is the nutrition and physical activity self-assessment for childcare, and it's a planning model to promote the implementation of evidence-based best practices for nutrition and physical activity within ECE programs. And initially this was center-based care, but has expanded to a couple different points beyond that. And the best practice standards that we use within knapsack were derived from authoritative bodies, from our extensive review of the research literature, and from expert opinion, both from other researchers as well as practitioners. There have been a couple different iterations of the knapsack best practice standards. So the old logo is on the top and the new logo for Go Knapsack is on the bottom. And I'll do a little bit of walking you through that history. In 2007, we developed a partnership with State Public Health Department, or with the North Carolina State Public Health Department, and that's where knapsack was born. So across that 2000 to 2007 period, we developed the planning model, rolled it out, evaluated it within that partnership with the State Public Health Department. As of 2008, the toolkit was freely available within the Center TRT website, which now it's freely available elsewhere. A couple other milestones along the way. We were involved in the development of the Let's Move Childcare. So that was the former First Lady Michelle Obama's initiative to improve the nutrition and physical activity standards within childcare. In 2012, this was kind of the start of the next phase of knapsack, or what we call Go Knapsack, or knapsack 2.0, all those different words for it. In 2012, we received money from the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation to expand, to revamp the best practices and to expand the planning model into an online format that could potentially reach a wider audience and a different type of audience than we were traditionally able to reach. And within that Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation funding, we revised and expanded the evidence-based practices because it had been several years since we had created the first round of best practice standards. And by that time, there was a lot of movement in terms of the standards related to nutrition and physical activity within childcare centers, lots of research that had come out, lots of authoritative bodies changing their policy recommendations. So we were able to capture those changes within our NAPSAC 2.0. As of 2014, the Go NAPSAC product is online, and you can all go visit the website, Go NAPSAC. And from there, we have been rolling it out into several different states, and more of that programmatic side. We have people on our team that are more than happy to talk to you about that if that's what you're interested in. But that was really just to kind of give you a lay of the land that we've been working in this area for quite some time. For the first round of NAPSAC best practices, I mentioned that we went through some review processes. Just to hit those a little bit for you, we reviewed all of the standards, so within policy level language at the state and federal and different authoritative bodies. We reviewed all of the available evidence in terms of research literature. And then we wanted to make sure that we got a perspective of people who were actually on the ground in the childcare setting. So we did interviews and focus groups. We partnered with the North Carolina Prevention Partners to get expert input, and as well we had our community advisory committee of teachers and parents and providers. For the second round of the Go NAPSAC best practices, so for that 2012 update, we took a similar approach, and we reviewed the research literature, recommendations, and policies, and the main ones are listed on this slide. And then we reached out to experts from 14 different research teams. From other experts were our childcare program practitioners and other groups nationwide. And this was to make sure that these Go NAPSAC best practices were realistic for people to reach. So maybe there was something that was a little bit unrealistic for people, and we wanted to make sure that we were meeting people where we were, or if, on the other hand, if there wasn't a ton of evidence that we could pull from the research literature, but if we heard from our expert opinion group that was something that we could stand on, kind of balancing all of the different buckets of information that we could get related to best practice standards. And those best practice standards typically fall within our 3 Ps model, which is evolving a little bit, but mostly works for what we're doing here. We think about the influence that a childcare center can have in terms of its provisions. So the foods and beverages provided, the physical activity and screen time that's provided, so that time component, the physical environment related to the eating areas, as well as any physical activity equipment and those play spaces. In terms of practices, this is any one of those teacher-child interactions that can support or hinder healthy children's behaviors. So this is related to the feeding environment, physical activity, and screen time. Within the policy domain, this is where we're moving towards shifting things around a little bit, but our policy P is related to the written policies, so what's codified law of the land within childcare centers, the staff training or professional education will be in that bucket as well. And last, any sort of parent communication and child education around nutrition and physical activity that center offers. So the 3 Ps model is kind of, it's simple, but it provides us a framework for thinking about what's the sum total of the aspects of an environment that we need to measure within childcare centers. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, I keep mentioning this Go Knapsack program, and so just to give you an idea of what it looks like. It starts out with childcare providers assessing where they are according to our best practices. So they take our self-assessment, and Go Knapsack was expanded to include these 5 different content areas. So we have child nutrition, so that's for preschool children, infant feeding and breastfeeding, infant and child physical activity, outdoor play and learning, and screen time. And so childcare providers can take as many self-assessments as they want, or they can pick and choose the ones that they're most interested in. Once they take that self-assessment, that's their way of figuring out where they are in terms of meeting our best practice standards. From there, they use our action planning tool, and that helps them figure out where they're doing well. They probably don't need to work on that as much. Then where maybe they're not doing so well, that would be an easy place for them to start. From there, they take action. So once they've made their plan in step 2 of what they want to work on, they go for it, and they use our tips and materials as well as technical assistance providers to put that plan in action and figure out what are the best practice standards that they want to work on and how are they going to do that. We involve a training component in this as well, specifically directed at directors and teachers. And then once they go through those, they go back to the self-assessment and reevaluate where they are. So are they making progress? And if so, they celebrate it, and then they can move on. And it's kind of this rinse and repeat cycle where we're asking childcare providers to only take off a little bit of the environment at a time and just a couple best practices at a time for continual quality improvement at the center level. The image on the right it shows you actually the old knapsack self-assessment, which looks a little bit different now in the new Go Knapsack model, but just to give you a framework for how those things are linked. So moving back to the EPAO, the EPAO itself is composed of 2 different parts. So this is our direct observation and the document review. Sometimes we'll call the direct observation, that's just the EPAO, and then it's the EPAO and the document review. So if that comes up, sometimes I use those interchangeably. The direct observation is exactly that. It includes anything that you observe on that day. So if it happened on that day, you can note it, and if it did not happen on that day, you do not note it. Within the document review, most of the things that we're looking for here are things that happen that you find within the written documentation of policy documents and handbooks and other sorts of written materials that you will get from the childcare director. And again, same thing applies here. When we're asking specifically about written documentation, if they tell you they did something but you don't have written documentation of it, we can't give them credit for it. So just keep that in mind. You're thinking about the things that you're actually observing as a data collector and the things that you're actually observing as having been written in the policy documents that you're evaluating. And that's kind of where we've drawn the line with the EPAO. Way back when we developed the EPAO, just to give a nod to the measurement perspective that we did within the EPAO development, we did do some inter-rater reliability testing, and there was a paper that Diane and the team at that point published in 2008. That was kind of our first EPAO paper, introducing the observation, and then again a little bit of the psychometrics that we were able to get. Within this paper, what they did was they went to 9 different childcare centers and used pairs of observers to make sure that there was good reliability between the items. And the mean agreement was 87%, and for the observation, and 79% for the document review. So pretty good on both fronts. As we would expect, the items with lower agreement were primarily those that were a little bit more subjective. So staff behavior, some of those policy items, things that you might expect to be a little squishier between observers. At the subscale level, there was pretty good inter-observer agreement. Again, those policy domains gave a little bit of an issue, as well as fixed play equipment. But overall, we had an opportunity to provide some psychometric testing to this observation in its original form. Here you see the different proportion of items falling in the different agreement categories. So most of them are falling well above 80% for both the observation and the document review. From our initial work with the psychometrics related to the EPAO, we learned that training is important, and it's important to make sure that all of the different components of the environment are clear, especially because so many of them are subjective. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in one of the other sections, but to bring it up here as well, it's really important to have an open line of communication between the data collectors and the project staff. So within our projects, we have weekly or bi-weekly meetings with me and either the project manager or the data collectors themselves. And we talk about all the issues that come up. After doing the EPAO for the better part of 9 years, there's always a new scenario and always a new consideration for where to place things within the EPAO. And so you just want to make sure that you're always acknowledging the nuances of different scenarios and being able to communicate those with your project team to make sure that your data is as high quality as it possibly can be. So for those of you who are new to the childcare environment, we wanted to just take a minute and go through some of the jargon terms that come up within that environment. Just like anything else, like the research world, there's specific terminology and specific things that happen throughout the day that you need to be aware of to be able to link it back to our EPAO. To give you just a little bit of a feel for what a typical day looks like, they're going to vary from center to center and from classroom to classroom. Mostly when we're thinking about the EPAO here, we're thinking about classrooms that have children who are 3 to 5 years old. The children who are anywhere from birth to 2, those schedules look a little bit different, but pretty standard for a preschool schedule. At some point, they'll come together for a morning meal. This is typically more of a snack than a full breakfast, but depends very much on the center itself. Then they'll do something called circle time, which we'll talk about the ins and outs of all these different activities. Then maybe they'll do some indoor center time and playing within the classroom. Then they'll go outside for maybe an hour or so, come back in, they'll have lunch. Then they'll take a nap for a very long time, which as a data collector is your reprieve for the day. So that's always appreciated. Once they wake up from nap, things are a little bit less structured. So maybe they'll have an afternoon snack, they'll play indoors for a little while and or go outside. And the order and length of these will certainly switch between different settings and different times of years and things like that. But just to give you a little bit of a feel for what might happen on a day that you will see as a data collector. So circle time is exactly that. Children are sitting in a circle, mostly on the floor. Usually there's a designated area of the classroom that's the circle time area. This is usually a very structured period of time, and it's usually very sedentary. This sometimes comes up, at least in the States, in kindergarten as well. So it's the same sort of thing there. And it's usually the marker of the beginning of their formal day within childcare. And activities can include anything from like a good morning song. They'll discuss what day of the week it is, what month of the year it is, what the weather is, what other sort of curriculum units they're working on. So if they're working on a unit that's focused on sea animals or the ocean and stuff like that, they'll maybe run through some flashcards with different animals on them and things like that. So that's where kind of that traditional curriculum building is happening. Maybe some things with alphabets or alphabet letters and numbers and things like that. While it is sedentary for the most part, sometimes it will involve a little bit more intensive activity, and this could be something like a movement activity with a song. So they're going on a bear hunt, and they'll have to make the movements of going on a bear hunt. So watch out for a little bit of that can happen there, but for the most part, it's a sedentary activity. And to give you a little bit of a feel for what that looks like, we'll listen to a little bit of a clip. So in that one, you can see that the teacher is somewhat sitting in the circle with them, and she's directing them to jump up and down, and that's their good morning song for the day. And we'll save the rest of that clip. In terms of center time, what we're talking about here, the centers, it's a little bit confusing because we're at childcare centers, but center time, the center there refers to different learning areas or stations that are spaced throughout the classroom. So examples of this could be manipulative play, which is more fine motor skill development. They could have a science or a discovery section with different, sometimes that's where you'll see a sand or a water table inside. They'll typically have an art station, so that's mostly at tables. And then they'll have areas on the floor where you can play with blocks or dramatic play, kind of that like dress up and housekeeping aspect of children's play. And this can be more structured or less structured, and it kind of depends on what the philosophy of the center that you're in is. Some of it will be as structured as you can have 3 children in a center, and the teacher will direct these 3 kids are going to this center, these 4 kids are going to that center, these 2 kids are going over here. So sometimes it'll be as directed as that, where the teacher is specifically placing children within a center. Alternatively, it can be a little bit more like free play. So this is child driven, so they can go to whatever center they want. It's not restricted. Perhaps there's a cap on the number of children that can be within one of the centers, but overall it's the child's choice as to where he or she wants to go. To give you a little bit of a feel for what centers typically look like, here we see the Science and Discovery Center on the top left. That's a sand table, or a sand or water table that is filled with mud, and they are using cups, or I guess filled with soil and water to make mud. Then you see some musical instruments, as well as some housekeeping area, a housekeeping area on the top right-hand corner. You'll see the blocks and manipulatives on the bottom first and second picture, and then finally the dramatic play housekeeping area. And here we'll just watch this for a little bit to show you a little bit about center time. So here you can see kind of the children are spaced around the classroom. Everyone's doing a little bit of a different thing. Maybe the teacher is facilitating a bathroom visit for everyone. And in this case, the kids are kind of free to go wherever they need to. Then moving on to outdoor time. This is often where children are getting the bulk of their higher intensity physical activity. And here what we want to do in outdoor time is distinguish between free play, which is unstructured or child-initiated, from teacher-led, structured, or teacher-initiated. And how we think about this is who is beginning the activity. So if the child starts an activity, no matter who is participating along with that child, that's free play. So it's the child's directed, or the child directs what they want to do. If instead the teacher begins an activity, whether or not they participate in it, that is what we would call teacher-led or structured activity. So this is kind of that bottom right-hand corner where you see the teacher leading a parachute game. It could be a big game of tag with the entire classroom, or it could be a little bit smaller and just, you know, the teacher and one or two other children. It can range in terms of size. We like to see a variety of both of these types of play being offered to children, and they typically happen outdoors. But they tap into different aspects of child's development, and so what we want to do here is, in free play, allow children to explore their creativity and their curiosity and explore the world around them. And with teacher-led activity, we can get a little bit of a different feel to that. So this is perhaps maybe they're learning more formal gross motor skills. And that's also, if the teacher does participate with them in that session, it's a chance for the teacher to have those good teacher-child interactions that can support children to develop a love of physical activity and movement and being active. We also can see these two sorts of play happen indoors as well. In the picture on the left, that is the teacher leading the group of children in a music and dance session. And sometimes this can pop up in a little bit of different places where you might not normally expect. The picture on the right was from a rainy day, and the teachers had the children do relay races in the hallway. So not all of it is going to be in places where you might expect, but that was a bout of teacher-led physical activity for those children. At this point, this is the end of part 1, so our introduction to the EPAO itself, as well as the childcare environment, and we'll weave in some more of those terms throughout the parts 2 and 3 of this training. So from here, you can close out of this session and move on to part 2 when you're ready.